Welcome to Crisis in Perception, where we examine the systems shaping our world.
And today we're diving into something that, well, it affects absolutely everyone.
Yeah, today we are embarking on a deep dive that feels incredibly personal. I mean, if you are listening to this right now, you have almost certainly felt the symptoms of what we are going to talk about today.
Oh, without a doubt.
And you probably blamed yourself for it too. But our mission for this deep dive is to step back and look at the massive invisible structures that are actually driving those symptoms.
Right. We are examining the digital media environment.
But we are not going to look at it the way we normally do. Not as just a set of incredibly convenient tools or, a neutral delivery system for the daily news and entertainment.
No, we are going to look at it as a massive, ubiquitous, cognitive shaping infrastructure.
Exactly. We are investigating how the very architecture of the web, the search engines, the social platforms, the hyperlink structures, the interface designs, the whole attention economy, how all of that is literally physically reshaping human cognition.
And to do this, we're pulling from a pretty rich stack of sources with a heavy emphasis on Nicholas Carr's foundational work, The Shallows, what the internet is doing to our brains.
But let's set the parameters right now. This is not a book review.
Definitely not. We don't do book reviews here. The book is simply our entry point.
Right. Our focus is systems-level institutional analysis.
We are using these materials to investigate a core premise, and that premise is how the structural properties of our digital environment favor rapid switching, constant interruption, and fragmented attention over sustained linear engagement.
Because we tend to think of the internet as like a library or a post office, right? Or a television network.
Yeah, a completely neutral conduit that simply passes information along to us.
But when you apply a systems-level lens, an entirely different reality emerges. You see an architecture that alters the neural circuitry of the human brain, completely independently of the actual content you happen to be consuming.
We're talking about a fundamental biological shift in how human beings process reality.
It's massive. And to really capture the emotional weight of this, I want to bring up an analogy from the sources that just instantly resonate with me.
Let's hear it.
It's from Stanley Kubrick's 1968 masterpiece, 2001, A Space Odyssey.
Oh, yeah. Such a classic.
If you've seen the film, you know the exact scene I'm talking about. It's toward the end, and it is eerily quiet. The astronaut, Dave Bowman, has just narrowly survived a murderous malfunction by the ship's artificial intelligence, the supercomputer HAL 9000.
Right, and he gets into the core.
Yeah, he manages to get into the zero-gravity core of the ship. He's floating there, absolutely silent, methodically disconnecting HAL's memory circuits one by one. He is shutting down the machine's brain.
And HAL starts to plead with him.
Yes. The voice is completely flat, yet somehow terrified. HAL says, "Dave, stop. Stop, will you? Stop, Dave. My mind is going. I can feel it. I can feel it."
It is one of the most chilling scenes in cinematic history because of that uncanny self-awareness of cognitive decline. The machine is feeling its capacity for complex thought evaporates in real time.
And that is the terrifying part. Because honestly, when I sit down today and try to read a long, dense article or a 200-page book, I feel exactly the same way.
Your mind is going.
It really is. My mind isn't gone, but it is going. It's changing. My concentration drifts after a page or two. I get fidgety.
You start looking for your phone.
Immediately, I feel this physical compulsion to open a new tab, check an inbox, just do something else. I literally have to drag my wayward brain back to the text. Deep reading used to be my default state. I could get lost in a book for hours.
But now
Now it feels like a monumental, exhausting struggle. And I know I am not the only one who feels this way. You hear it from everyone. Friends, colleagues, people who read for a living. We all feel like HAL.
That shared experience is exactly why this requires a systems-level analysis. Because the immediate instinctual reaction you have when you realize you can no longer focus is to blame yourself.
Oh, 100%. You think I'm losing my discipline. I have no willpower. I'm getting lazy.
And that is the very first trap we fall into when we fail to see the system. When you feel that cognitive slippage, that frantic inability to sustain focus on a single linear narrative, you are not experiencing a personal moral failing.
You're not just broken.
No, you are experiencing the highly predictable outcome of interacting with a very specific system design. Your brain is adapting exactly as it is supposed to adapt to the environment you have placed it in.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Because if we want to understand how a screen is overriding our brains, We have to look at the actual architecture of this digital medium. We have to look at the design.
Right. To grasp this shift, we have to dismantle a massive collective delusion we have about media in general.
The myth of neutrality.
Exactly, the myth of neutrality. We need to rewind the clock to 1964. The Beatles have just arrived in America, the space race is in full swing, and television is rapidly becoming the dominant force in American living rooms.
And a media theorist named Marshall McLuhan drops a book called Understanding Media.
Yes. And in it, he makes a prophecy that is just mind-bending. He coins the phrase, the medium is the message.
We've all heard it. It's printed on tote bags and coffee mugs everywhere. But what does it actually mean in practice?
It is arguably one of the most profound yet routinely ignored insights of the 20th century. McLuhan observed a pattern in human behavior. Whenever a new informational medium arrives, the printing press, the radio, the television, and now the internet, we become entirely obsessed with the content it carries.
Right. We argue passionately about what is flowing through the pipe.
Exactly. If it's a newspaper, we debate the political bias of the articles. If it's the radio, we argue about rock and roll corrupting the youth.
And if it's the internet, we spend all our energy debating whether social media algorithms are polarizing our politics, or whether TikTok is making kids narcissistic, or whether Wikipedia is democratizing knowledge.
And McLuhan pointed out that this debate, while culturally noisy, entirely misses the point. The technology of the medium itself disappears behind the content. We assume the pipe is just a pipe. We assume the technology is neutral.
We think of it as just a delivery truck. The truck doesn't matter, only the cargo matters.
That is exactly the prevailing mindset. There is a classic historical example of this blind spot involving David Sarnoff.
Media mogul.
Right. He practically built the broadcast industry. He pioneered radio at RCA and television at NBC. In a speech in the 1950s, Sarnoff was defending his massive media empire against critics who said television was rotting the minds of the public.
What was his defense?
He argued that technology is just a tool. He said the products of modern science are inherently neither good nor bad. It is solely the way they are used that determines their value.
He's playing the ultimate defensive card. He's saying, don't look at my television networks, look at the people holding the remote control.
It's that old, deeply comforting idea that human beings are always entirely in the driver's seat. A hammer is inert until you pick it up to build a house or pick it up to smash a window. The tool itself has no agenda.
But McLuhan absolutely went off on Sarnoff for this, didn't he?
Oh, he didn't just disagree. He mocked him. McLuhan chided Sarnoff for speaking with what he called the voice of the current somnambulism.
Sleepwalking.
Yes. He basically said that arguing that a technology's impact comes only from how it's used is the numb stance of the technological idiot.
I mean, calling the pioneer of television a technological idiot is a bold move.
It was a brutal public intellectual takedown, but it was necessary to shatter that illusion of control. McLuhan was trying to wake society up to the reality that the medium itself, the structural form it takes, dictates the scale and form of human association and action.
So the structural properties of a medium reshape our cognition completely independently of the content it carries.
Precisely. If you spend 3 hours on the internet reading dense, academic, peer-reviewed philosophy, and I spend 3 hours watching people fall off skateboards, the content is wildly different.
But the medium is still demanding that both of us process information in a rapidly shifting, multi-threaded, nonlinear way.
Exactly. We are both staring at glowing screens, parsing hyperlinks, managing multiple tabs, and fielding notifications. The screen bulldozes our doubts with its sheer bounty and convenience.
We become so fixated on the endless feast of information laid before us that we fail to notice that the table itself has fundamentally altered how we eat, how we digest, and what we hunger for.
Which brings us to perhaps the most brilliant, vivid analogy I have ever heard for this dynamic.
The burglar and the watchdog.
Yes. McLuhan wrote that the content of any medium is just the juicy piece of meat carried by the burglar to distract the watchdog of the mind.
Just picture that for a second. You are the house. Your critical faculties, your conscious awareness, your ability to reason, that is the watchdog sitting on the front porch.
And the medium itself, the smartphone in your pocket, the networked computer, is the burglar.
And the content. That breaking news alert about a political scandal, the viral video your friend just texted you, the urgent email from your boss. That is just the juicy steak the burglar tosses over the fence.
While your conscious mind is completely distracted, chewing furiously on the content of that tweet or email, the structural properties of the medium are quietly slipping through the back door.
walking right past your defenses and rewiring the circuitry of your house.
That dynamic is the absolute foundation of a systems-level view of media. The structure of the networked computing environment is specifically built to prioritize speed, interruption, and multitasking. It is a burglar that moves incredibly fast.
So to understand how this highly specific ecosystem evolved, we really have to look at the historical choices made by the architects of these systems,
We
right?
do. We often view our current technology as inevitable, but it is the result of distinct design philosophies. Let's look back at the 1970s, specifically at the Xerox PRC laboratory in Palo Alto, California.
Essentially the birthplace of modern computing.
Exactly. They invented the graphical user interface, the mouse, Ethernet networking. At one point, a researcher was giving a demonstration of a brand new system. For the first time, this system featured overlapping windows on a single screen.
Okay, picture that.
During the demo, the researcher was typing software code in one window. Then a notification popped up. He clicked over to a second overlapping window to read a newly arrived email.
And then?
He typed a quick reply, minimized the email window, and hopped right back into the first window to continue programming.
Which to anyone listening today sounds like the most boring, mundane series of actions imaginable. That is just what computing is.
But the reaction in that room in the 1970s was wildly split. Half the audience in that laboratory saw this demonstration and started applauding. They saw the massive revolutionary gains in efficiency.
They realized a computer didn't just have to process one batch of data at a time. You could use it as a dynamic workstation to juggle multiple threads of work simultaneously.
But the other half of the room, or at least a very vocal contingent of scientists, literally recoiled in horror. One scientist aggressively challenged the presenter, demanding to know, why in the world would you want to be interrupted and distracted by email while programming?
The fact that it sounds mundane to us today proves how entirely we have internalized the overlapping Windows interface. We live in a world of windows within windows.
Browser tabs squeeze so tightly together you can't even read the text on them, all waiting to trigger even more windows.
But that specific moment at Xerox PRs represents a profound conflict between two fundamentally different ways of working and two completely divergent understandings of what intellectual tools should do.
The skeptical scientist in that room viewed his programming work as an exercise in solitary, single-minded concentration. He valued the deep, unbroken immersion that the traditional printed book had culturally trained humanity to revere for the last 500 years.
But in the choices we made as a society, as we adopted personal computing, we overwhelmingly rejected that intellectual tradition of solitary concentration.
We cast our lot with the juggler. We embraced a paradigm where multitasking is not just permitted, it is structurally mandated by the interface itself.
We didn't just embrace it, we built an entire world around it. The science fiction writer Cory Doctorow came up with a phrase that perfectly captures what that Xerox PRC demo eventually birthed. He calls our modern digital environment an ecosystem of interruption technologies.
That is the perfect term.
When we open a laptop or unlock a phone, we aren't just looking at a tool. We are plunging ourselves into a hostile cacophony of stimuli. It is an environment composed of push notifications, algorithmic timeline sorting, auto-playing videos, and software widgets running in the background.
Your calendar app pings you about a meeting, which is interrupted by a text from your partner, while a news app flashes a banner across the top of your screen.
All while you are trying to write a single sentence in a document. The environment is designed from the ground up to fracture your attention.
And perhaps the most subtle yet overwhelmingly powerful weapon in this ecosystem of interruption is the hyperlink.
Really, just the simple link.
Yes. We just think of links as digital footnotes, right? It's just a way to cite a source. But cognitively, they operate in a completely different universe than a footnote.
How so?
The comparison to the footnote is very revealing. Traditional footnotes or citations in a physical book point to related works, but they remain strictly subordinate to the primary text.
Right, you might see a little number at the end of the sentence, drop your eyes to the bottom of the page, read the citation, and return to the sentence.
Your cognitive anchor remains firmly planted in the primary narrative. Hyperlinks, however, do not merely point you towards supplemental works, they physically and conceptually propel you toward them.
They're like doors scattered throughout the text.
Exactly. And they encourage you to constantly dip in and out of a series of different texts, rather than devoting sustained attention to any single one. Hyperlinks are explicitly designed to grab your attention.
So their fundamental value as navigational tools is completely inextricable from the distraction they cause.
By weaving hyperlinks into the very fabric of digital text, the architecture of the web inherently favors rapid lateral switching over sustained, linear, vertical engagement.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because if this entire system, the overlapping windows, the push notifications, the hyperlinks, is fundamentally designed to interrupt us, to aggressively fracture our attention into a million little pieces, we have to ask the systems level question, why?
Why is the internet architected this way?
Exactly. It certainly wasn't an accident. And to understand the why, we have to follow the money. We have to examine the incentive architecture of the platform business models that absolutely rule our digital lives.
The economic layer is the engine driving the architectural design. The design choices that fragment your attention are not bugs. They are features perfectly aligned with the monetization structures of the digital economy.
We're dealing with massive global platforms that generate revenue primarily through two mechanisms, right?
Advertising and behavioral data extraction. To maximize that revenue, these platforms must optimize their interfaces for highly specific metrics. They don't care if you achieve enlightenment or learn a new skill.
They care about engagement time.
The sheer volume of clicks, your scroll depth, and the number of ad impressions they can serve you per minute. Let's run a hypothetical scenario.
Okay, let's do it.
Imagine you sit still and read a single, deeply researched, long-form essay for 45 minutes on a single web page. From a cognitive standpoint, that is fantastic for your brain.
But from the platform's perspective,
That is a disaster. During that 45 minutes, you might see 3 or 4 static ads. Furthermore, you are generating almost zero behavioral data for the platform to harvest.
because you aren't clicking.
You aren't revealing new preferences,
Yeah.
you aren't demonstrating your network connections or your impulse control, you are economically stagnant.
But let's look at the alternative. The platform designs the page so the essay is broken up into a slideshow. Or it peppers the text with algorithmic recommendations for articles you might also like.
Or it embeds a controversial auto-playing video halfway down.
Yes, if they can get you to abandon that deep reading, click a hyperlink, skim a new page for 10 seconds, get angry at a video, get distracted by an email notification, and bounce over to a social media feed in that exact same 45-minute window, you might load 40 different web pages.
You might scroll past 300 ad impressions.
And crucially, every single time you switch contexts, every time you click a link, hover over an image, or pause on a video, you are dropping digital breadcrumbs.
You are generating a massive, highly granular trail of behavioral data that the platforms collect, package, analyze, and sell to advertisers to predict your future behavior.
So monetizing the juggler is infinitely more profitable than monetizing the solitary thinker.
The solitary thinker is a dead end. The faster you click, the more rapidly you switch contexts, the more valuable you are to the machinery of the system.
And this economic imperative, this institutional prioritization of sheer efficiency and high-speed data turnover, it drives a phenomenon we see across the entire media landscape, the unbundling of content.
Because audience attention spans are shortening to adapt to this rapid-fire environment. And because search engines are designed to index discrete, isolated pieces of information rather than holistic works.
So media companies are forced to chop their products into smaller, easily digestible, highly clickable pieces. Think about how media has transformed. A television show used to be a cohesive, hour-long broadcast with a narrative arc.
Now, the most valuable parts of that show are chopped up into 3-minute snippets and distributed on YouTube or TikTok to capture fleeting attention.
A music album used to be a thematic 45-minute journey conceived by an artist. Now, the album is split apart into individual streams on Spotify, or even further reduced to 15-second audio hooks embedded as background noise in viral social media trends.
Even journalism is completely unbundled. Articles from magazines and newspapers circulate on social media in total isolation from the rest of the publication. The editorial context is stripped away.
You don't see the article placed next to a dissenting opinion on the op-ed page. Everything is just a freestanding data point floating in the infinite stream, desperately trying to grab your attention for 3 seconds before you scroll past it.
And look, we have to acknowledge that there is a consumer appeal to this. It provides us with incredible, unprecedented choice. You no longer have to pay $15 for a whole CD just to get the one song you actually like.
But we have to look at what this structural unbundling demands of us. It structurally demands rapid switching.
It takes the industrial ideal of efficiency, The logic of the factory floor, the assembly line, what Google might refer to as the world of numbers and metrics.
And it applies that industrial logic directly to the intimate realm of the human intellect. We are taking the ethos of the assembly line and forcing our minds to operate at that mechanical, hyper-optimized pace.
What's fascinating here is that this isn't just a metaphor. We aren't just adopting a cultural preference for fast media. We are experiencing the biological consequence of this economic and structural reality.
Which brings us to the hard science of neuroplasticity.
For a very long time, well into the 20th century, the prevailing scientific consensus was that the adult human brain was essentially fixed. The belief was that your brain was malleable during childhood, but once you reached adulthood, your neural pathways were hardwired. If you lost brain cells, they were gone forever.
But thanks to pioneers in neuroscience, we now know that this is entirely false.
Completely false. The adult brain is highly plastic. It has the astonishing ability to physically remap its neural circuitry to strengthen certain synaptic pathways and prune away others, based entirely on repeated behaviors and environmental stimuli.
The brain physically adapts to the tools we use to navigate the world. As the neuroscientist axiom goes, neurons that fire together wire together.
And there is a stunning example of this neuroplasticity in action, specifically regarding the internet. There was a landmark study conducted at UCLA by a psychiatrist and neuroscientist named Gary Small.
Oh, this study's incredible.
He wanted to see exactly what happens inside the physical structure of the brain when human beings search the web. So he recruited two distinct groups of people for an experiment. The first group were internet novices, people who, for whatever reason, barely spend any time online.
And the second group?
They were veteran surfers, people who were highly experienced, daily web users. He took individuals from both groups and put them inside an fMRI scanner.
For those who don't know, an fMRI is a massive, incredibly loud, tube-like machine that uses powerful magnetic fields to track blood flow in the brain in real time. Basically, it lets researchers see exactly which parts of your brain are lighting up and consuming energy while you perform a task.
So he has these people in the scanner, and he has them read web pages through a special set of goggles.
What happened?
The initial results were striking, but perhaps expected. When the veteran surfers were scanning the web pages, their fMRI scans showed extensive, widespread activity across multiple regions of the brain. Most notably, their prefrontal cortex was highly active.
And the prefrontal cortex is the area of the brain located right behind your forehead. It is the command center associated with complex decision-making, problem-solving, and evaluating alternatives.
Exactly. But when the internet novices read the exact same web pages, their prefrontal cortex was largely dormant. Their brain scans looked very different.
Because they were essentially reading the web page, much like they would read a traditional printed book page. They were utilizing the brain regions associated with language processing and visual processing, but they were not engaging the complex decision-making centers. They were just reading the text.
That makes sense, right? The veterans are used to the interface. The novices are treating it like a book. But the next phase of Gary Small's experiment is the part that genuinely dropped my jaw.
Tell me.
The researchers sent those internet novices home with a very specific assignment. They were told to spend just 1 hour a day browsing the internet for 5 days. That's it. A grand total of 5 hours of internet exposure spread across a work week. 6 days later, the researchers brought those novices back to the lab, put them back inside the fMRI scanner, and had them surf the web again. The new scans revealed something unbelievable.
After just 5 hours of practice.
Yes. The previously dormant areas in the novice's prefrontal cortex were now showing extensive, furious activity. Their brain scans now looked almost exactly like the brain scans of the veteran internet surfers.
In less than a week.
In less than a week, their brains had already physically rewired themselves, forging new neural pathways to handle the specific, high-speed cognitive load of the digital medium. Gary Small looked at these results and asked a terrifying question.
If our brains are so incredibly sensitive that they physically alter their structure after just 1 hour a day of exposure, what in the world is happening to our minds when we spend the vast majority of our waking, professional, and social lives online?
It is a staggering question, and the implications for how we process information are profound. It demonstrates scientifically that our digital habits physically alter our reading mode.
Because the environment demands rapid context switching and constant evaluation of links, we are systematically training our brains to abandon deep reading.
Deep reading is a specific cognitive mode. It is linear, it is contemplative, it is immersive. It requires a sustained, unbroken period of concentration to follow a complex narrative arc, or to untangle a nuanced philosophical argument.
But online, because of the hyperlinked architecture we discussed, we cannot sustain that mode. We revert to a much more primitive form of information gathering. We become foragers.
We browse, we scan, we spot keywords, we jump around non-linearly. Jacob Nielsen, a prominent web usability expert, conducted eye-tracking studies to see how people actually read web pages. He found that very rarely do people read online text line by line.
Instead, their eyes move in what he identified as an F-shaped pattern.
Mm.
I have to admit, when I read about the F-shaped pattern, I laughed out loud because it's so painfully accurate to how I behave.
It really is.
You read the first couple of lines of an article all the way across the screen. That's the top bar of the F. Then you drop down a bit and read, maybe halfway across, a sentence that catches your eye, the middle bar. And from there on out, your eyes just plunge straight down the left side of the screen, completely ignoring the bulk of the text, just scanning for bullet points, bolded words, or a hyperlink.
I realize I do this with almost everything.
I'll open a recipe online, and I don't read the author's 5-paragraph story about their grandmother's kitchen. I just F-pattern scan straight down until my eyes hit the bold word, butter, and then I start paying attention. We are skimming the surface of an ocean of text.
Exactly. And the cognitive mechanics behind why we adopt this F pattern, why deep reading becomes so physically difficult online, are crucial to understand. It brings us right back to the architecture, specifically the hyperlink.
Right, because when you are sitting in a chair reading a physical printed book, the ink on the page is entirely static. There are no decisions to make other than whether to turn the page.
Because the environment is stable, your brain can devote all of its cognitive resources, all of its processing power, to interpreting the text, understanding the subtle nuances of the author's argument, and building rich mental imagery. Your brain is in an immersive flow state.
But online, the environment is hostile to flow. Whenever your eyes pass over a hyperlink, a simple blue underlined word, your prefrontal cortex must pause.
Even if it is only for a microsecond, your brain has to evaluate a choice. Should I click this link? Does it open in a new tab or navigate away? Will I lose my place? Is this link more interesting than the sentence I'm currently in the middle of reading?
So even if you don't click it, the sheer presence of the link demands a toll from your brain.
Precisely. This constant low-level mental coordination, this continuous redirection of cognitive resources away from deep language processing and toward executive decision-making significantly impedes your ability to comprehend and retain the information.
We sacrifice the very cognitive facility that makes deep reading possible.
Because we are constantly evaluating choices, we revert to being mere decoders of information. We can process the literal meaning of the words, but we fail to make the rich inferential mental connections that deep, uninterrupted reading fosters. We get the data, but we lose the depth.
I want to share another analogy here because the science of memory can get abstract, and this visualization from the research makes it so incredibly clear. It explains exactly what happens to our brains when we operate as mere decoders in a high-speed environment.
Let's talk about the mechanics of memory.
You have working memory, which is your immediate short-term capacity to hold information in your head. And you have long-term memory, which is the vast archive of everything you know. The process of learning is moving information from your working memory into your long-term memory.
Imagine that process is like trying to fill a large bathtub using only a tiny thimble.
Your working memory is the thimble. It has a very small, strictly limited capacity. Your long-term memory is the bathtub. It can hold a vast, seemingly infinite amount of information, creating rich, complex mental schemas and associations.
It is a perfect structural metaphor. When you are reading a physical book in a quiet room, the flow of information entering your working memory is like a steady, manageable drip from a single faucet. You control the pace. If the concept is difficult, you slow down.
You have the time, the space, and the single-minded concentration to carefully fill that cognitive thimble, walk it over to the bathtub, pour it in, and begin building those deep, interconnected memories. You are actively constructing knowledge.
But think about what happens when you are on the digital network. You are not standing in front of a single dripping faucet. You are facing 10 different information faucets, and they're all blasted open at full volume.
You have the article you were trying to read on your screen, but right next to it is an auto-playing video ad. Your phone is buzzing on the desk with a text message. A little banner slides down telling you an email just arrived. You have 5 other browser tabs open, and a hyperlink is begging you to click it to see a related controversy.
As you frantically rush from one faucet to the next, trying to catch all this incoming data, your little thimble constantly overflows. The water is splashing everywhere. You are overwhelmed by what psychologists call cognitive load.
Because you are exceeding the strict capacity of your working memory, you're only able to transfer a tiny fractured portion of the information into your long-term memory bathtub.
And worse, what you do manage to transfer is just a chaotic, jumbled mix of drops from a dozen different sources, rather than a continuous, coherent stream of logic from one author.
You completely fail to forge the rich, deep associations that are the essential building blocks of true understanding and wisdom.
And we don't have to rely on metaphors. There is hard empirical data to back up the thimble and bathtub dynamic. Let's look at a study conducted by Russell Poldrack, a prominent psychologist and neuroscientist at UCLA, who specifically investigated the effects of multitasking on learning.
He set up an experiment where adults had to learn specific facts by making predictions about a series of colored shapes on a screen.
In the first trial, the subjects were allowed to just focus single-mindedly on the shapes and learn the rules.
In the second trial, he introduced a distraction. The subjects had to predict the colored shapes while simultaneously listening to a random series of audio beeps, and they were required to keep a running mental count of those beeps. They were engaging in classic divided attention multitasking.
Now, here is the kicker, the part that makes this study so important. In both of those trials, the focused one and the distracted one, the subjects successfully learned the basic facts. They figured out the rules of the shapes. They got the job done.
If you only looked at the surface level, you would say multitasking doesn't hurt performance.
But the researchers didn't stop there. After the trials, they tested the subjects on how well they actually understood the underlying concepts they just learned. Could they apply the rules to a new, slightly different situation?
The results were night and day. The subjects from the focus trial performed beautifully. They understood the concepts deeply.
But the subjects from the multitasking trial performed terribly. The act of dividing their attention to count the beeps had completely short-circuited their deeper cognitive understanding. They learned the isolated facts, but they completely lost the meaning. They couldn't generalize the knowledge.
Which leads us to a rather grim systems-level conclusion about individuals who consider themselves heavy media multitaskers. People often brag about their ability to juggle 5 things at once on their computers.
But Stanford researcher Clifford Nass conducted extensive tests on intensive media multitaskers, and his findings were brutal. He found that heavy multitaskers become objectively terrible at ignoring irrelevant information.
Their cognitive filters break down.
They are chronically distracted by environmental noise. Nass famously and bluntly called them suckers for irrelevancy. Because their brains are constantly scanning the horizon for the newest, most immediate piece of information, they completely lose the top-down attentional control required to stay focused on a primary, difficult task.
As one of the absolute pioneers in the field of neuroplasticity summarized it, when we constantly multitask online, we are systematically training our brains to pay attention to the crap. We are optimizing our neural pathways for trivia at the expense of substance.
So what does this all mean?
Yeah, so what does this all mean? We have established that the architecture of the web is designed to interrupt us. We know the economic incentives demand we click and switch contexts constantly. We know from fMRI scans and psychological studies that this environment overloads our working memory, prevents deep conceptual learning, and physically rewires our brains to be chronically distracted.
If all of this is true, why on earth does the system persist? Why do we voluntarily, enthusiastically plug ourselves into an ecosystem that essentially turns us into stressed out, cognitively depleted jugglers?
The system persists and grows stronger because it relies on an incredibly powerful, self-reinforcing feedback loop. It is driven by the trap of immediate convenience and a profound psychological dependency.
Let's look at the behavioral loop, which ties right back to neuroplasticity. Users physically adapt to the fragmented digital environment. Your brain becomes wired to expect and process short, fast, superficial inputs.
The tech platforms continuously monitor this behavioral shift through their data harvesting. They see that users are dropping off long articles but finishing short listicles. They use that data to justify further architectural optimization for speed and interruption.
The product managers say, look at the data. Users are only watching 3-minute videos, so we need to algorithmically prioritize videos that are 60 seconds long and make them punchier.
This creates a reinforcing downward spiral, where the digital environment trains the brain to demand distraction, and the newly distracted brain demands an even more fragmented environment to hold its fractured attention.
And on a deeply psychological level, we actually crave the interruption. We want the burglar to throw the juicy meat over the fence.
Our evolutionary biology biases us to pay immediate attention to new, sudden stimuli. It was a survival mechanism to notice the rustling bush that might hide a predator. In the digital environment, tech designers weaponize that instinct.
Every text message chime, every email ping, every little red notification bubble on an app icon feels like a potentially valuable piece of information or a signal of social validation. It triggers a small, unearned hit of dopamine in the brain.
We become addicted to the novelty. We crave the new, even when we know intellectually that the new notification is almost always trivial. A spam email, a promotional offer, a random comment.
We are terrified of missing out, of feeling disconnected from the digital herd. So we willingly accept the constant fragmentation of our thoughts, the destruction of our deep reading, in exchange for the vast, endless wealth of diverting, dopamine-triggering information the network provides.
Exactly the trade-off. And because this overwhelming preference for speed, brevity, and constant connectivity has become culturally dominant, major societal institutions are forced to adapt to it.
This institutional adaptation only serves to further reinforce the system's dominance, making it inescapable. We are seeing a rapidly declining tolerance for long-form, sustained concentration everywhere, even among highly trained experts.
Consider an anecdote involving Bruce Friedman, a pathology faculty member at the University of Michigan Medical School. This is a man whose entire career is built on the careful, meticulous analysis of complex medical data.
Yet, Friedman publicly admitted that he has completely lost the ability to read long-form text. He stated he can no longer read War and Peace or any deep novel.
More alarmingly for a scientist, he admitted his thinking had taken on a staccato quality. He said he can't even absorb a blog post if it is longer than 3 paragraphs. He just skims it.
When highly educated experts, the people we rely on for deep analysis and breakthroughs, are openly admitting they can no longer read linearly because the internet has rewired them, a profound systemic shift has occurred in our culture.
It's not just individuals adapting. It's bleeding directly into our educational systems. There is a deeply unsettling quote from Mark Fetterman, a prominent education researcher. He was giving a speech to a group of teachers, the very people tasked with shaping the next generation's minds.
Fetterman literally argued to these teachers that traditional linear literacy, the ability to read a book from cover to cover and follow a complex argument, is a quaint notion.
He dismissed it as a mere aesthetic form that is increasingly irrelevant to modern society. He argued that students should actively abandon the linear, isolated world of the printed book and fully embrace the web's world of ubiquitous connectivity and rapid information retrieval.
Think about the massive implications of that. We are no longer just passively tolerating digital distraction. We have influential educational theorists actively championing distraction and skimming as the new intellectual ideal. We are institutionalizing the juggler's brain.
We also see this institutional reinforcement aggressively playing out in the publishing industry, primarily through the illusion of the enhanced ebook.
Publishers are not blind. They look at the data and recognize that attention spans are plummeting. Their market for 400-page novels is shrinking.
So in an attempt to save the book and make it relevant to the modern digitally wired brain, they try to adapt the medium of the book to the medium of the internet. They create enhanced ebooks where they inject hyperlinks directly into the text. They embed behind-the-scenes video interviews with the author. They add audio narration tracks, and they integrate social media widgets so you can tweet a quote directly from the page.
Which is completely spectacularly self-defeating. If you take a linear immersive book and you inject it with hyperlinks, videos, and social media notifications, it is fundamentally no longer a book. You have dissolved the medium's original physical form and recreated it in the chaotic image of the internet.
An ebook littered with hyperlinks demands the exact same constant decision-making, the exact same prefrontal cortex pausing and cognitive juggling as a standard distracting web page.
The publishing executives think they are enhancing the reading experience by adding value, but structurally, they are destroying the very quiet, stable environment that makes deep, immersive reading cognitively possible in the first place.
The sheer convenience and efficiency of being able to carry 1,000 interactive, multimedia books on a single lightweight tablet completely masks the catastrophic cognitive trade-offs we are making. We trade depth for access.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, It is vital to understand that this tension between immersive, contemplative thought and efficient, rapid data processing is not an entirely new phenomenon. It didn't just appear when the iPhone was invented.
This conflict is deeply embedded in the history of capitalism, industrialization, and the clash of competing cultural ideals. Our modern digital cognition is simply the latest product of media institutions and economic structures that treat human attention not as a sacred space, but as a raw resource to be aggressively mined and monetized.
To truly understand the stakes of what we are losing, we can look back to a highly revealing historical anecdote from 1844 concerning the great American writer Nathaniel Hawthorne.
I absolutely love this story because it paints such a vivid picture of the transition we were talking about. It's 1844, right at the dawn of the major push of the Industrial Revolution in America. Nathaniel Hawthorne is sitting in a sunlit clearing in the woods in Massachusetts, a place known as Sleepy Hollow.
He is in a state of deep pastoral contemplation.
He's sitting there with his notebook, beautifully describing the sensory details of his perfect piece. He writes about the smell of the sweet fern and the white pines. He hears the gentle rustling of the leaves. He can hear the very faint, distant striking of the village clock and the soft, rhythmic sound of farmers whetting their scythes in the fields far away.
He notes in his journal that these distant sounds of human labor don't interrupt him. They actually increase his quietude. They make him feel connected to the world, but completely insulated from its frantic disturbance. He is engaged in deep, undisturbed reflection.
And then, abruptly, violently, his reverie is shattered.
He writes in his journal, "But hark, there is the whistle of the locomotive, the long shriek, harsh above all other harshness."
A massive steam train comes tearing through the woods on newly laid tracks, obliterating the quiet. The cultural historian Leo Marx analyzed this exact journal entry in his brilliant 1964 study, The Machine in the Garden.
Marx argued that the violent clash Hawthorne experienced that afternoon, the quiet, meditative clearing in the woods being suddenly aggressively interrupted by the noisy, mechanical, relentless busyness of the train, represents the fundamental conflict between two entirely different conditions of human consciousness.
It is the clash between the pastoral ideal of meditative solitary thought and the rising industrial ideal of mechanical efficiency, speed, and continuous production.
And when we look at the modern landscape, Google, Meta, and the other massive internet platforms are the modern locomotive. They are the roaring steam engines of our era. The stated mission of these platforms is to place all their structural stress on the absolute, frictionless efficiency of information exchange as the ultimate key to human intellectual progress.
Google's famous mission statement is literally to organize the world's information and make it universally accessible and useful. That is a profoundly industrial mandate.
But as Hawthorne instinctively understood back in 1844, when you carry that industrial ideal of maximum efficiency and maximum speed directly into the fragile realm of the human intellect, it poses a mortal threat to the pastoral ideal of meditative thought.
We need both modes to function as complete humans. We need the locomotive's efficiency for data collection and communication, but we also desperately need time for inefficient, wandering, deeply quiet contemplation to make sense of that data.
The problem is, our digital tools are designed to keep our minds in a state of perpetual locomotion. We are losing the structural ability to ever retreat to our mental sleepy hollow.
And this relentless erosion of contemplative time, this inability to retreat into quiet thought, has profound implications for our shared cultural memory. Human attention is a vital, finite resource. When our attention is relentlessly fractured by the architecture of the network, our inner lives fundamentally change.
We begin to process information widely, gathering massive amounts of trivia, but we process it entirely superficially. The avant-garde playwright Richard Foreman articulated the fears surrounding this shift beautifully. He spoke of his historical ideal of the highly educated personality.
For centuries, the ideal was a person who carried inside themselves a personally constructed, entirely unique version of our cultural heritage. Through years of deep reading and contemplation, they built a complex, dense inner structure of history, poetry, philosophy, and narrative.
But now, under the immense daily pressure of information overload and the seductive technology of the instantly available search engine, Foreman fears we are being aggressively drained of our inner repertory of dense cultural inheritance.
Foreman coined a term for what we are becoming that is just chilling in its accuracy. He calls it pancake people.
We are spread incredibly wide and incredibly thin. We connect to this vast global network of information, accessed by the mere touch of a button on our phones. But because we never dwell deeply on any of it, we lack depth.
We know a tiny superficial bit, about a million different things. We read the headlines, we see the trending topics, but we lack the dense inner structure to contextualize it. We are eagerly outsourcing our memory to external data banks. We don't need to internalize facts or narratives because we can just rely on Google to remember everything for us.
We treat the internet as an external hard drive for our brains.
And here is the profound existential warning embedded in the text. Culture is not just the aggregate total of all the world's information sitting on massive, cooling server farms in the Nevada desert. Culture is not just binary code and indexed Wikipedia pages.
True culture only exists and remains vital if it is actively, continuously renewed and synthesized in the living minds of the members of every generation. By voluntarily offloading our memory to the digital network, by relying on search algorithms instead of deep internalization, we are not just altering our own individual cognitive habits. We threaten the very depth and distinctiveness of the culture we share as a society.
We devolve from being active cultivators of personal knowledge, people tending to our own rich, idiosyncratic mental gardens, into mere hunter-gatherers in an endless electronic data forest, frantically grabbing bits of data when we need them, consuming them instantly, and moving on without leaving a trace inside ourselves.
Which brings us to the absolute crux of this entire deep dive. Everything we have discussed today, the myth of the neutral medium, the architecture of the hyperlink, the economic incentives of the ad model, the neuroplasticity of the F-shaped reading pattern, the tragedy of the pancake people, it all points to a massive society-wide structural blind spot.
It really does.
So I have to ask you and the listener the central question of this show, the question we use to bring the system into focus. What is the crisis in perception here?
The profound crisis in perception is that we operate daily under the false, comforting belief that technology is simply a neutral tool and that only the content of the medium matters. We mistakenly believe that if we are reading a classic, deeply philosophical novel on a hyperlinked, notification-enabled screen, we are engaging in the exact same cognitive act as reading that novel on a quiet printed page.
We completely misperceive the medium itself. We look right past the screen and only see the words.
Exactly. What is completely obscured from our everyday surface-level view is the incredibly powerful structural layer of the medium's architecture and the invisible economic incentive design driving it.
We do not see that the interface, the overlapping windows, the hyperlinks, the endless scroll, and the notification systems are specifically, deliberately optimized by platform business models to maximize our distraction in order to generate monetizable behavioral data. We think the internet is a library, but it is actually an attention harvesting machine.
And because we fail to see that structural economic layer, our surface-level interpretations of our own lives, our own struggles, completely fail us. When we find ourselves staring blankly at a page, unable to focus on a long article, or when we suddenly realize with a shock that we spent 2 hours mindlessly scrolling through short videos, we immediately blame ourselves.
We think our lack of focus is a failure of individual discipline, or a sign of moral weakness, or just laziness. We beat ourselves up for being weak-willed.
We entirely fail to recognize that our distracted, frantic state is actually the precise, mathematically intended outcome of a brilliant, pervasive, multi-billion-dollar system design.
That is precisely how a systems-level analysis profoundly changes our visibility. It shifts the burden. It reveals that our cognition, the very way we think, is environmentally shaped.
Our shortening attention spans, our increasing preference for skimming over deep reading, our inability to engage in sustained contemplation, these are not purely personal moral failings. They are predictable, structural, biological adaptations to the digital ecosystem we inhabit.
Once you perceive the system, you stop blaming the victim. You stop blaming yourself. And only then can you begin to make conscious, deliberate choices about how and when to engage with the architecture that surrounds you. You can choose to step off the locomotive and walk back into the garden.
That is incredibly powerful. The system wants you to think it's your fault, but it's the architecture. Before we wrap up today, I want to leave you, the listener, with one final provocative thought to mull over.
Let's hear it.
Let's build one last time on Marshall McLuhan's theories. McLuhan noted that historically, whenever humanity adopts a powerful new tool, that tool brilliantly amplifies some specific part of us, but it also inevitably ends up numbing the very part of the body or mind that it amplifies. He used the example of the mechanical power loom during the Industrial Revolution.
It massively amplified the sheer production volume of cloth.
But in doing so, it numbed the weaver's manual dexterity. The weavers no longer needed that innate, intimate feel for the fabric. Their fingers literally lost their touch because the machine took over the nuance.
So what's the modern parallel?
If our modern digital systems amplify our access to raw, unbundled information to absolute superhuman levels, giving us the entire world's data in our pockets, what deeper human faculty is currently being permanently numbed in the process? Is it our capacity for deep, quiet contemplation? Is it our empathy, which requires the slow, sustained attention of reading another person's inner life to truly develop? Or is it our very imagination itself, which needs the empty space of boredom to flourish?
Something to think about.
Crisis in Perception examines how systems shape belief and how better tools help us see clearly.
This project is free and publicly accessible. If you'd like to support the time, tools, and research behind crisis and perception, you can become a supporter on Patreon.
For a shorter, visual overview of this topic, see the mini explainer linked in the description.
If you enjoy this kind of systems-level analysis, please like, subscribe, and comment with books or topics you'd like us to explore next.